Everybody, this is Joshua Hatton with One Nation Under Whiskey Podcast, Extra Edition. I am joined today by the one and only, the inimitable Jessica Rabbit Guillermo Lomas. Hi, Jessica.
Hello. Thank you. That's a great introduction for a Monday morning thought for you / afternoon. We're slightly later on here. I don't know if I can even say inimitable.
Inimitable.
Yes,
it's a tough word. Inimitable.
It's a horrible word, so. But I'll go with it, and I'll I also whenever we've done this and you've said the one and only, I am still only hearing Chesney Hawkes, who I hope, following our previous discussion on this, you did go away and listen to the track, because now it's in my head. And it's going to be there for 3 weeks. So well done me for bringing that onto myself.
Yep, anyway, and to the listeners who happen to know Chesney.
So. Everybody knows Chesney.
And to Chesney, can you imagine the royalties being made after people hear you mention the name, and now people are going to listen to it?
Well, I've bankrupted myself, because it's just going to spin around in my little squirrely brain 24/7 now until I hear something else that's equally irritating and won't leave my mind. So I'm a fool. I brought it all on myself. So here we are. Extra.
Yeah.
Extra.
Well, it's not an extra, but it'll be extra.
Okay.
I took extra sleep aids last night to help me fall asleep. So I need extra coffee to wake me up, and maybe some extra whiskey to wake me up.
I reckon we could do that. Should we do the hard work first? I've come to you with some cutting news.
Oh.
Which makes us One Nation Under Whiskey with some E's in it.
Oh, shit. Okay, you've got whiskey with an E news. This is...
on my brain.
Is this good news or bad news? Usually whiskey with an E. I don't know if I'd call that good news, but yeah.
Well, I feel like we have this conversation every summer, which is that like everybody, the whiskey world sort of goes on holiday. And so unless it's really big, bad news, the whiskey news front tends to be a little bit quiet. But there is something that caught my eye the other day that I thought was quite interesting, that I thought maybe we could discuss as a news topic and an extra. And here we are. So,
okay.
I have been I've been cheating on us. I was listening to a podcast discussing Irish whiskey.
Okay.
And I was interested to hear that there is a consultation being put out to the industry in Ireland to possibly change the technical description of Irish Potstill Whiskey. And I thought this was interesting because I'm very used to being at distilleries, and I'm sure you have been to other places all around Scotland where people throw at you all sorts of very old bits of legislation in Scotland about excise acts and things that we really use to tie ourselves up in Scotland as to what we would define Scotch, and specifically, most of the time when you're having it quoted at you, single malt whiskey from Scotland.
Right.
And I hadn't realised that the Irish geographical indication, a GI, not a G.I. Joe, just a GI. I hadn't realized it was a relatively modern... Yeah, I hadn't realized it was a relatively modern piece of legislation in Ireland. And so I thought that was quite interesting, but also interested to read that they are thinking about changing some of the definitions in it. So our wise and intelligent listeners to this very important podcast will know that there's a bunch of things in Scotland that most Scotch whisky drinkers can quote at you about what it is that makes something a single malt Scotch whisky. Most famously, and the one that is quoted everywhere, is that it has to be 3 years old before we can call it Scotch whisky.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, little sidebar here. I got into an argument with a tour guide at a distillery that if you pay me some money, I'll tell you where I was, who did the question of, and how old does it have to be called whiskey? And the group that I was on just went silent. And in order to keep us moving along, because this guy was clearly waiting for somebody to say something, I said, oh, it's 3 years and a day. Which so far, I think most listeners to this podcast would agree is the technicality.
That's the
That's the detail, right? Yep. And I used the words 3 years and 1 day, at least. And he spun around on his heel and looked at me and he said, "Ha ha, you have fallen into my trap." And I was like, "Sorry, what? No, I haven't." And he said, "I keep a copy." And then he tapped his pocket where he had a literal paper copy of the regulations.
Oh my gosh.
He said, "I keep a copy to correct people when they say that to me." So, dear listeners of the podcast, you can decide whether or not I should have punched him there or then. He said the regulations specify a minimum of 3 years. He said the regulations do not say 3 years and a day. They say a minimum of 3 years. Now, semantically, I would argue that I wasn't incorrect there, to use a double negative. I immediately was like, well, yeah, 3 years and a day is more than 3 years. And he said, yeah, but it doesn't say that. Anyway, so I was put off drinking their whiskey for a long time. Come and ask me at the Jubilee who that was. Unless they have a table with us, in which case I won't.
Oh, yeah, they're going to be right next to our table, Jess.
Well, the brand I'm very, very fond of, I suspect that man is not going to be at the Jubilee. I will personally ensure that man is never at a Jubilee that I'm at.
So
that's how serious I am about this. Don't mess with me.
Okay.
Anyway, end of the sidebar. Right. So there are some specs as to what makes Irish Potstill whiskey within that category. And if you are producing whiskey in Ireland, you can still make your whiskey and call it Irish whiskey. You just can't call it Potstill whiskey.
So, right. So we know the Scotch whiskey stipulations. One that you mentioned, being double distilled. Right.
Yep.
Distilled, matured, bottled in Scotland. In the U.S., we know bourbon, 51% corn, matured in new charred oak casks. Then there's, other nomenclature.
Sure. So I think anybody who's been to Scotland.
Yeah.
I was going to say that you have correctly inserted the bourbon, but I do think that maybe lots of people, or certainly not in Scotland, I'm going to generalize on our behalf here, maybe couldn't tell you what it is that makes Irish whiskey Irish. I think a lot of people would probably have got that triple distillation in there.
Yeah.
Because that's a common, thing that we use to differentiate. Here in Scotland, we make lots of very mean jokes about we get it right after 2 distillations and the Irish need a 3rd attempt. I have heard the flip side of that is that the Irish say they go for 3 because 2... the 3rd distillation makes it too strong for Scotland. It's too pure. It's too strong for Scottish people, so they have to stop at 2. So, depending which side of that argument you want to lie on.
That second argument holds no water whatsoever.
I think they're both rubbish, personally. But there are a couple of things in this consultation about Irish Potstill whiskey that they are looking to change. And this, I think... Really, the GI was registered, this technical file is what it's called, was registered in 2014, which seems frighteningly recent to me for it to be a geographical indication to be putting on labels. But it's the Ireland's Department of Agriculture have opened this consultation. Okay. And a bunch of people have responded, but as you would imagine, the Irish Whiskey Association were hot off the press, straight in through the door with their list of suggestions. And I think they should probably be followed up on. One of which was, in Scotland, we obviously, for single malt whiskey, we only use malted barley. Correct. But Irish Potstill whiskey, you can have a mixed mash bill, so closer to kind of what you just mentioned there for America, which is, in Ireland, you can have, it's supposed to be a minimum of 30% malted barley, a minimum of 30% unmalted barley, and you are allowed... This is complicated maths in my little brain. You're allowed up to 5% of other cereals. Now, these other cereals are not specified. So, fill in the blanks now, listeners, as to what cereals you can think of. Yes, some of those.
Lucky Charms, Apple
Captain
Jacks.
Crunch.
No, right. So if it's 5% of the other cereals, and minimum 30% malted, minimum 30% unmalted barley. I mean, right there, it's only 65%. So no one's doing that.
So you could have 60% malted, 35% unmalted and 5% of these different grains. It's a minimum of 30. So it's a kind of slide till it adds to 100 of your own. You don't have to add these 5% of other things in it. But the bit that's interesting here is where lots of the small producers who are making things, I'm trying not to give myself loads of clacks and noises about whiskey words here. Some of the smaller producers who are very interested in ensuring that the whiskey they produce is in tune with historically what would have been produced in Ireland are pointing out that lots of these whiskies would have had other grains in it. For example, oats. Oats seems to be the main argument. So it's suggested that you could have oats, wheat and rye. There wasn't a huge amount of rye being grown in Ireland, but little bits of it do appear. But it's the oats, I think, seem to be the main sticking point here, which is that in Ireland they grow lots of oats, and records show that in some of the records up to 30% of this mash bill would have been oats. So one of the suggestions that the Irish Whiskey Association have put forward here is that we increase that maximum of 5 and make it a maximum of 30. So that it is more in tune with what was historically being produced in Ireland and helps create the heritage. And then there's lots of arguments which start veering into marketing about authenticity and, you know, keeping with brand traditions, blah, blah, blah. But I do think that's but probably the most interesting of these proposed changes. But while we're here, we could also talk about how the technical file also has a reference to maturation in oak. And again, the Irish Whiskey Association are saying they would like to get rid of that and focus on just wooden casks, because in Ireland they have traditionally used different types of wood in a way that we haven't embraced in Scotland. And again, that's a differentiation between what we're doing either side of the Irish Sea. And there's a little line as well about the definition has inserted about non-peated. And there's an increase in whiskies in Ireland being produced using peat. So they want to get rid of that to avoid any confusion. So, like I say, I think these are interesting because some of the small producers are already doing what is being proposed, but because they don't produce whiskey within this technical definition, they are not allowed to call themselves pot still whiskey. So there's a distillery I'm quite fond of called Cullowen. Brendan Carty, the guy who is in charge of the distillery, set up the distillery, is definitely a great guy banging a drum in the kind of consultation for this, saying that we should be looking at more traditional methods and what was done. He has an absolutely teeny tiny distillery. I can't go away and Google it. Like, go and look at how small that is. It's 2 direct fire pot stills. He's got 2 teeny tiny little worm tubs on it, and he produces like absolutely teeny tiny amounts of whiskey. What I've had of it is absolutely stonking. It's brilliant, direct fired, delicious. At the interview that I listened to, Cullowen were described as the Springbank of Irish whiskey. So I think that's unfair on both distilleries, personally.
Those are big words.
I understand the suggestion here, which is about if you love the kind of nerdy, very geeky aspect of what you would find at Springbank and other distilleries in Scotland, you are going to absolutely love what Brendan's doing. So that's what I have extracted from that. So I think that's really interesting. There's also other distilleries such as Boan and Two Stacks, who I know are also doing this too.
Oh, yeah. Yep. I know Two Stacks. Yep.
Yeah, because they at one point were part of our shared portfolio in Canada. So Two Stacks and Cullowen
That's correct.
were with us for a bit.
Correct.
And so they're just making great, interesting whiskies. And I like the idea that these producers are setting up wanting to be true to the origins and the history of Irish whiskey. And currently their production means that they're not within this. So I think that's creating confusion for people drinking, because to all intents and purposes, what they're drinking is Irish pot still whiskey, except that some of these mash bills don't meet the requirement. It's not so radically different. It's not like they're making it in buckets with sieves, maturing it in glass demijohns, and it's just about, you know, if Brendan's using a decent amount of oats in his mash bill at the beginning of the process, it's no longer Irish pot still whiskey by this definition. So I understand the argument for having it changed. There's also an argument here that this is more of a correction rather than an expansion of the definition of Irish pot still.
Oh, I like that.
I like that too. Yeah. I like the idea of it being truer to the heritage. And there were some other people Louise McGuane, who runs JJ Corrie, was talking about how when this definition was put together in 2014, there's been a huge growth in the category since then. We've gone from having kind of 4 or 6 distilleries, and now there's around 40, some people have said 50 distilleries in Ireland. Yeah. So it's like a huge growth opportunity, I think, to just bring the producers who are trying to do something, I don't know, authentically to what is their aim, I guess, as whiskey producers, keeping it in touch with what has been done previously.
Yeah,
I just think it's a really interesting argument, partly because we, especially as a single cask nation, we have followed that definition and the creation of American single malt as a category and followed along with what that means for the producers and the people who are making it. And that's really interesting because I feel like that's a group of people who are coming together and setting the tone. They're setting what will be for history. Whereas I feel like the Irish producers are kind of coming together and trying to say, well, we actually want to recognize how we've always made Irish whiskey in a much more set way than currently some of us who are making really delicious whiskey can't take advantage of this name and the protection that comes with the GI.
Right. And I think it gives them the opportunity as well to give the Irish whiskey consumer, actually the whiskey consumer writ large, an education that they never had. I think one of the most difficult things with Irish whiskey is that you've got your 3 different categories of blended, pot still, and single malt. And no one really knows what Irish whiskey is. You bring up Irish whiskey in a conversation, people immediately think of Jameson, or they think of Powers or something like that. And they just assume it's that, not even knowing that that's a blended whiskey. And so doing this, bringing attention to pot still, which seems to be that more not traditional, but more unique style of whiskey production to that country.
Yeah.
I think it's great for the category, and tying this thought into another article we were discussing before we hit record, which was the overall popularity of Irish whiskey or of spirits exports from the EU out of the EU has been in Irish whiskey. So the fact that continues to grow, this is the perfect time for them to capitalize on that year-over-year growth to then put a focus on the pot still. Yeah, I really like this.
I think it's also important, because the Irish industry has gone through such a massive, tumultuous period of radical change. Like at one point, there was essentially just 4 distilleries left, and they nearly lost all of the tradition and the production and the whole of Irish whiskey really was just hanging on very small amounts of companies producing. And I think that's, although we have obviously had lots of problems in Scotland, historically, especially the big crash in the beginning of the 80s and the previous one 100 years before that, I think we never in Scotland lost it or came so close to losing it completely. So I think this is about empowering Irish producers as well in what they're doing. So that statistic you just quoted there is apparently over the last 4 years there's been a 21.5% growth in exports of Irish whiskey, and it makes up for 1/3 of all European spirits, which is crazy. Wow. Because similarly, I was reading another article. I've gone a bit of an Irish whiskey rabbit hole this morning, but the Ireland has the 2nd highest excise rate in Europe. So they are second only to Finland. I think they pay the average of a 40% whiskey or a 40% spirit at a standard 700ml bottle that we have over here is €11.92 per bottle. If you compare that to somewhere like Spain or Germany, if you don't want to convert the euros into dollars or pounds or whatever currency you're working in, just as a stark difference. So that's €11.92 for Ireland, and it is €2.69 in Spain.
Wow.
That's the same tax on the same product.
Holy cow.
And it's €3.65 in Germany. And then in the UK, a 40% is £9.92. So that's about €11.60. So we're in the UK, we are up there for excise duty.
And so this has always been my understanding of pot still and the reasons for pot still was that the use of unmalted barley was to get around certain taxes because malted grains were taxed different than unmalted grains. Is that correct to your understanding?
So that's the ever so generous British government in the 1700s with the malt excise tax. But there is some argument which says it actually predates that. There are apparently records going back another 150 years before that of actually there was recognizable large amounts of unmalted barley being used in production in Ireland anyway. There's definitely an argument, I think, to be made that the British slapping a whacking rate tax on malted barley probably encouraged the use of the unmalted grains. Yeah. But from what I have had a look at, it's not necessarily the be-all and end-all. It's a bit murky also because we're in a time when Google didn't exist and articles are not quite as accurate as they were. But yeah, that definitely is the often quoted reason for the Irish using unmalted, and it happened the same in beer production. You see unmalted grains, and unmalted grains are much harder to work with, so you don't necessarily get the same efficiency when you're in fermentation. I'm waiting for all of the scientists to write in and correct me there, but that's also one of the suggested changes they want to make in this consultation is to have it as you can have a 40% of unmalted grain starting, and that would allow for some efficiencies because you're not getting the same sugars and starches. So yeah, it was just really interesting reading that. So that and the idea that the Irish industry is obviously extremely important, so they kind of want to protect it and tidy it up in a way that I think in Scotland we've done careful now, either a very good job or a very restrictive job. Delete as you see fit with the SWA. But it's this big product that I think there's no harm in, I think, in updating and modernizing and recognizing what amazing spirits some of these producers are making. So I'm all for it. I think especially because it's coming from the Irish Whiskey Association. They've obviously consulted with producers. This consultation will run for a little bit longer. It's 10 weeks. So it's the beginning of September. So we're not far away from that being closed. And then I guess they will have to take in all the evidence and considerations that people have requested to possibly be made before they go for the next step of this. Yeah. I just think it's really interesting for something that was created not long ago.
It is, and again, back to your point about the reasons for it, that it brings it back to what Irish whiskey likely would have been because of the inclusion of other grains, of other cereals, or increasing the amount of other cereals that can be used. And I've always liked the idea of challenging what a whiskey could be, what a classified whiskey could be. But there can be peril to that. So for years, I've been a proponent, right? Yeah, exactly. For years, I've been a proponent of changing. And this is my own internal argument. There's never been an argument that I can think of that I've ever read that's ever been brought up regarding this. But in my head, I've always said, wouldn't it be nice if the bourbon category and even the rye category allowed for the use of used oak? And
I think the entirety of the American bourbon industry just gasped and clutched its pearls. You are now banned from America. Yeah. That's really awkward.
Right. And so this is, I never really, I can't believe
Have you met lumberjacks, Joshua? Have you seen the size of these men who you've just said, it's all right, guys, for half the week we don't need you. We're just going to reuse these lovely casks over here. Yes, these are big men. Big men with chainsaws.
Listen, I get it. And I don't want to get on their bad side. But imagine the flavors that could be found if the bourbon industry allowed for used oak. It wasn't always new charred oak. New charred oak was a newer stipulation.
You are a frightening and crazy man on a Monday. What is You are absolutely ringing true to on my bingo card. So some listeners to this podcast will know that every distillery I go to, regardless of the location, I like to play a little bingo card. Mm-hmm. And there's a bunch of stuff on here. The one about the age of maturation for Scotch whiskey is on there. And the other one is about, you'll inevitably get a tour guide who is riffing on some information they've had where they get really into it. They get into when America's about to make it so they can reuse these casks in the bourbon production. And that's it. Scotland will have no more casks ever again because they'll just keep them. So you, my friend, have hit a bingo point on this fine afternoon.
I have hit a bingo, yeah.
There are the opportunities for that because if I remember the definition to American single malt, there's no need in there for it to be first fill new oak. So we have got the opportunity to have experimentation and some of that flavor discovery in American single malt. Don't you be getting greedy. Leave those bourbon casks for us. I have to keep feeding tour guides these lines about how bourbon casks are £60 because in America they can't reuse them.
I would just love to see a bit more experimentation in the bourbon world. I think it's all just a bit too tight. And so in hearing the Irish pot still world open up or allow for more cereals to be used, that A, it brings them closer to the original heritage, but B, could potentially make things a bit more exciting for the Irish whiskey drinker because you can have new and interesting flavors coming from this. I love bourbon, but the thing that I've always go easy, Jess. The thing that I've always found difficult with bourbon is that it's always been tied to this new charred oak cask, and you can't really break outside of that. Yes, you can use finishing casks and things like that afterwards, but that new charred oak cask is really tight, really constricts all of the flavors into something that is so specifically bourbon and nothing but bourbon. And then, extra matura in port, extra matura in sherry, extra matura in insert cask. Here, you get the nuance, but it's not the same as using a finishing cask in Scotch whiskey, where the flavors can really take a swing, yet you still know it's a Scotch whiskey, right?
Sure. There's also an argument to be made there that in bourbon, you're already playing with flavors we don't have available to us in Scotland. We've tied in single malted barley only. So we can now, if you want to get really nerdy about it, the thing that's open to us and you is we can play with different types of malted barley. But in Scotland, it has to be barley. There is no escaping that. There is no oats. There's no rye if you want it to be a single malt. Not only that, we have also tied ourselves in hard to the idea of oak casks for maturation. So we can't play with acacia or chestnut or some of these really funky casks that you can in other places. I've had a bunch of Swedish whiskies that have been matured in chestnut oak, and they are incredible. They have so many unusual, just delicious flavors that don't exist in Scotch whiskey because we've decided that traditionally that's not what we would have used, and therefore it is banned because it's not an oak.
And that was
my counter to your idea of flavor creation would be that in the land of semi-free bourbon, you're already half a foot over that. You've got the mixed mash bills happening in a way that we don't have. Well, we could do it here in Scotland, but we wouldn't be allowed to call it single malt Scotch whiskey.
Right.
We would have to call it British Spirit.
Right. I guess the grass is always greener on the other side, isn't it?
It's interesting to me, I think, being privileged to live in a world where the Scotch whiskey regulations are so set in stone and firm, whether you think that's great or not. It's fun for me to watch other countries having the ability to play with what they want, what rules they want to set themselves to. And we've seen that a little bit. We've discussed previously, like the rules that Welsh whiskey is creating. We're looking at American single malt whiskey, places who are creating regulations and rules of the game to set themselves to. It's also kind of funny to me to see Irish whiskey, which arguably has a much older history than Scotch whiskey, depending who you ask, deciding to also in 2026 change those rules too.
So I can't believe you said that out loud.
We're all Egyptian. It came from the Egyptians. It's fine.
We're all Egyptian. Yeah, we're all in 2D. So my question for you then is what changes to the Scotch Whisky Association rules would you like to see for Scotch whiskey, for growth, for flavor growth, or allowable changes to production?
I love this. You've just got yourself cancelled from the bourbon industry, and now you want me to also go on record slandering myself from the Scotch whiskey
canceled, Jess.
industry. I don't know about that. I might just refuse to comment on this. I would like to be able to see maybe more creative use of different casks. I do think there is merit to be had from them. I'd like it to be not in a potentially... depends who owns what as to whether or not we're allowed to use casks. That's my bit of controversy there, that previously we were very funny about no other spirits, and yet if some people buy tequila brands, suddenly tequila casks are okay, even though most of us know tequila doesn't really spend any time in wood. At least not the tequila that everybody in the UK drinks when they are young and stupid, because that comes with a plastic hat on it, and that's definitely never been anywhere near wood. So the idea of tequila casks is a nonsense. But I like the idea of, I would like to see more traditional types of wood, rather than it just being about the spirit that has maybe seasoned it. Like, why not let's play with some chestnut oak? Why not play with acacia? Why not do different types? I know that chestnut is a pain in the tits to work with. The distillery or the bottlers that I went to see who were maturing in chestnut said it's a very flexible, bendy cask, and it leaks really badly. It's like Mizunara. It leaks like nobody's business. Okay. But there's an element of flavor there that's happening that doesn't come from adding syrups or artificials. This is from the wood. So to me, it seems kind of mad that we've decided that oak is the thing. But I think there's plenty of other things to be made from. I'm not sure necessarily that I think Scotch does need to be going into single malt whiskey. Should be going into the idea of mixed mash bills. I just really feel for these tour guides who already have a hell of a lot on their hands on a 15-minute tour of the distillery, to then have to start explaining ratios of malts. Leave these poor souls alone. They're already arguing with me about semantics for whether or not 3 years and a day is the minimum 3 years. Let's not start off on a bad foot immediately the second we set into the still house. Yeah. So maybe I would like that. Just allow a bit more freedom and maturation and shaping the spirit and where it's going. Mm-hmm. Are you going to tell me now that you would just throw the rule book away and everyone can make it in their bathtub?
No. I like rules. I like rules and regulations. I think they ensure that, like with whiskey in mind, right? They ensure that things stay the course and you're getting a familiar product. No, I think that's very important. But I do like the idea of allowable changes. I think for me, I think a change that I would love to see would require a bit more trust with the consumer. And it's what Compass Box was trying to do. I know Aaron did it years ago with their Devil's Punch Bowl, which was putting more information in with the packaging so people know what's actually in their whiskey. I like the idea of, if you have a 15-year-old whiskey and it's some special edition, list the casks that are in there. Maybe there's some 18-year-old liquid in there from a ex-Calvados cask that helped bring these flavors in. We're granted, not all consumers, the vast majority of consumers are not very well versed in these sort of nitty gritty bits of information. But when it comes to the special editions, I think those that are buying them already are kind of in the know already. So allowing the consumer that has a bit more whiskey information to have that information at their fingertips, I think would only help the consumer. It would help the brand. It made me sad when the SWA was cracking down on Compass Box and cracking down on a number of other brands for just trying to be transparent.
Yeah, that does seem kind of crazy to me. I don't think there's any harm in telling your consumer what they're choosing to spend their hard-earned money on. It seems sort of weird to me to be like, shh, I'm not telling you. I mean, it does sort of exist in, I guess, other industries, but certainly not in, like, if you think about food, packaging has to tell you what's inside it. They can't just be like, we put some other things in there. So it seems mad to me that we are not allowing transparency where people are asking for it. I mean, fair enough if you don't want to look into it, you don't want to dig into it more, you just want to drink the thing you bought. Fine, I can totally live with that. But I think if you've got people who want to learn more and want to go beyond this delicious liquid that they're drinking with their pals or whatever, I think they should have the freedom to find out more. That has always seemed ludicrous to me. And I sort of think by the end of it, especially when they were really going for the SWA, I think Compass Box were kind of almost getting off on winding up the SWA, pointing out another thing that was ridiculous and another thing that's ridiculous. Like, I was working in retail when they started arguing with it, and then products were having to be taken off the shelves because it's not the correct labeling. These things must not be told to people. So I think that's okay. Well, I'm not cancelling you in the Scotch industry. I can't speak for the bourbon. Right. There is something else that I have been looking at that maybe we could discuss on a different extra, which is quite interesting. I sent a bunch of messages to annoy various whiskey friends, on Friday night. I had seen an Instagram clip talking about how the bourbon, specifically bourbon staves in casks, are increasingly thin, and we're never going to have mature whiskey because of it, like really old, very well matured whiskey. So I will report back on this maybe in another episode when I have finished digging and annoying various producers and whiskey oracles that I have social media and or phone number access to. And I will come back and we can talk about that, because that kind of ties in with this argument about bourbon reusing their barrels.
Yeah.
So we'll put a little pin in that, to quote Jason. Okay. Put a pin in that and we can look at that for another day. But in the meantime, I thought the thing about Irish whiskey, possibly having a little shakedown, could be a ton of fun. So this is my submission for my extra whiskey episode.
Whiskey, yeah. Well done. No, this was great. Speaking of Irish whiskey, and those that might be interested in Whiskey Jubilee, whiskey without an E, but Jubilee with 3 E's.
With a bunch of them, yeah.
With a bunch of them. Our friends at Jameson will be at the Jubilee. They're going to have their own table and hopefully show some interesting, not your run-of-the-mill Jamesons, which, by the way, I always have a bottle of quote-unquote run-of-the-mill Jameson. I think it's a fine little
Jameson
whiskey.
a ginger beer. It's a thing of delight. But within the Jameson family, once you've had a delicious basic person Jameson, nothing wrong with that. Once you have got past that, you then get to enter the world of Redbreaster. And that is really, I frigging love Redbreast in all of its forms. If I have felt very spendy, the 21-year-old is absolutely delicious and is something I would reach for.
Interesting.
If I'm in a very expensive bar in Dublin, I would probably just tame that down a little bit and go for the 12. 12 is delicious. There's a cask strength and the 15. And then they do really fun additions. They've done a Lustau Sherry edition. They did a single cask for Sweden a few years ago that I managed to get a bottle of, which is like nectar, and that's cask strength. Absolutely delicious. 14 years old. Oh, great.
I have one. Hold on.
Oh, listeners, he has run away into the distance. Oh, he's returning.
I'm a Redbreast. I wouldn't call myself a Redbreast fanatic, but I really love Redbreast and have always loved what they do, and it's so interesting. I think the 15 has always been my favorite, but this is my closed bottle. But this was for the viewers, a small batch cask strength that was for Julio's in Massachusetts. But I got this Julio's in Redstone Liquors. This was like right before COVID.
Nice.
That's when this was released. But their liquid is remarkable. Yeah, and this is single pot still Irish whiskey, exactly what we'd been talking about. So,
I also really like it because I like the Robin. And did you know the reason for Redbreast having its name? I've learned so much from this, and I promise I will fully credit the interview in a second. Redbreast was named after the chairman was a very keen bird watcher. And they used to call him Mr. Redbreast, apparently.
He's a
and
burger.
So it's named after Robin Redbreast. That's why it is genuinely Little Robin. He was very cute in all the adverts. I mean, you shouldn't be swayed, children, by adverts, but it's a good-looking bottle and it's delicious whiskey, so I'm sold.
Is he a rockin' Robin? Tweet?
Nice, just a nice little guy in a garden.
Yeah.
No, he's not singing that. Maybe that will replace Chesney Hawkes in my head, though, so... Thanks, Joshua. If you want to go away and listen to this, because I'm going to lead Joshua down a garden path in a second for this. If you want to go away and hear the chat, I was listening to an interview with a guy called Barry Chandler, who you can find on the internet as Irish Whiskey Barry. I very much enjoyed listening to him. And he runs Sippin' Stories in the US, in Illinois. So you can go away and find him, and he does an Irish drink subscription. So
there you go.
That's what inspired me to do this. But hey, Joshua, do you know what some people might say to make you cringe really hard? And do you know what? People do say this to me even when you're not even in the same country. They say, I had something last night. I had a really nice whiskey, and I want you to tell Joshua I enjoyed it because it was smooth.
Fuck.
I just died inside. He looks so pained.
I just died inside.
Looks like he stood on a plug or like a bit of Lego he wasn't expecting. Which led you and I to discussing. So I don't hate it. I don't hate it, and certainly not in the way you hate it. I would argue that smooth is a description for an absence of something rather than an active description.
Right.
I would say.
Right. So why talk about an absence of something?
Because I think it's quite often used by people who maybe can't explain what's happening in their glass, and so they say, "Oh, it's smooth," because I think they expected people, especially if you're just starting out in the whiskey world or you don't regularly drink whiskey, and they're hanging out with us knowing that we like the turbocharged stuff. If you hand them something and they take a little sip and they breathe out and they don't maybe do the pained face that you just did, they quite often will look and say, wow, that was smooth, because I think they were expecting to be assaulted and have their throat ripped out. People have had bad experiences with something that was too peaty before they were ready, or too strong or too rough, and maybe not particularly well aged, or it's cheaper whiskey. And so I think people quite often use smooth to explain a pleasant experience that wasn't terrifying and didn't rip their throat out. So I'm down with it. But I do love that people come to me and say, you can tell Joshua I had that and it was smooth. And I'm like, you go tell him. Good for you.
It's I don't know how my hatred of that word has crossed country lines. I can go into any country, and if they happen to know Single Cask Nation, or if they know the podcast and they know me, they know I hate this word, and they poke fun.
Well, luckily, they now will remember that you just cancelled the bourbon industry instead. They'll have all forgotten all of your crimes about the hate word smooth. So
I'm trying to help the bourbon industry, Jess. I don't know if you know this, but numbers are down. I think I can help the bourbon industry.
I was going to make a Trump joke there. No, let's move on. I see that you are sipping something from a glass.
Yeah, so I put some...
Is it smooth?
It smells smooth. I put some some Bushmills Black Bush into my glass because I was thinking, again, remember, I started this episode off with, I took extra sleep aids to help me fall asleep. So I wasn't really thinking about what Irish whiskey I had on my shelf. And then you mentioned Redbreast, and now is it too late for me to switch whiskeys? Because I haven't sipped, I've only nosed. You're in charge of your glasses. Okay. You're the one doing the washing up. There we go.
And that, dear listeners, he's jogged off back down. I feel like this is, I don't know if in the US you have a TV show. When I was a kid, there was a thing called Supermarket Sweep, which was basically a fake supermarket, and they set you up with challenges, but it was on a timer. And so you had to run around the supermarket with a trolley. Like, there were like promotional items you had to get in for extra points.
Yeah. Yep.
I, as a child, always wanted to be let loose in a supermarket causing chaos like that. You just disappearing off like that very much looked like they would give you some items on a shopping list and you'd have to run and go get them and come back the fastest. So you have supermarket swept. I assume that's the past tense. What did you sweep off your shelf?
So my hope was that I was going to find my my opened bottle of this small batch cask strength Redbreast, because it's It really is something special. I bought 3 bottles of it at the time. But instead, I found the Redbreast 12-year-old cask strength, but this was bottled in January 2011. So it's an older release.
So before the GI for Irish whiskey, Irish Potstill Whiskey, was registered. Look at you.
Uh-huh. Yeah. So there we go. So this is the smooth thing. I can't believe I said that I'm putting into my glass. What do you have in yours?
Well, I have nothing currently. The brief was, for those people who are unfortunate enough to be watching my face while we're talking, I just popped behind the grand piano in search of the smoothest thing I could think of quickly. In this insane 28-bedroom mansion that I live in, as you can see from the screen, I have a lot of very smooth things. My desk is literally littered with whiskey, but I don't know if I would count any of them as smooth. I do have a bunch of Redbreast hiding somewhere, but I couldn't put my hands on it quickly. Sweet Scott's hidden it somewhere. But I was trying to think of the smoothest thing that I have drunk recently, and that is a little Glenfiddich Grand Cru 23-year-old.
There you go.
So I also hadn't poured it so that you could all have that noise. And I'll put my
I love that.
Mic.
So I've got a question for you as we're nosing and tasting this.
Oh, yes.
Something that I've never really done. But I've always been fascinated by people who do this. I've never rated a whiskey from a numerical standpoint. It's always been, let's talk about the whiskey, and in the end, do I like it? Do I not like it? Do I really like it? That kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. Do you rate your whiskeys? And if you do, how do you rate your whiskeys?
If I'm just drinking whiskeys with friends, or I'm just drinking at home, I don't tend to rate, especially not numerically, I don't rate whiskeys. But when I do whiskey judging, I obviously have to rate things numerically. And that's easier because there are categories that explain the ranking that you're looking for. Mm-hmm. Do I think that it's always the perfect way to express it? No, I guess you have to give space for personal bias. I'm always interested by how people rate whiskeys. Is it out of 100? Is it out of 10? Is it decimal places? Is it stars out of 5? I guess how people quantify their whiskey. I also don't necessarily want to be held to like a rating that I have on a day when I drink. Today I've poured this into a very fancy little glass, but sometimes I just pour it in like a rando tumbler in the cupboard, or like it depends how fancy I'm feeling when I want to drink a whiskey. Mm-hmm. I find whiskey really subjective in a way that I maybe don't necessarily do if I was drinking a beer. Mm-hmm. So I quite like, there's an app called Untapped. Mm-hmm. I used to use it a lot. I do still use it a bit, but not so much. And that's really interesting when you meet other fellow beer nerds and you ask and you discuss ratings, see what the average score people give on Untapped. So Untapped is out of 5, but there's kind of like a sliding scale bit attached to it. It's really interesting. I think my average score on Untapped is like 3.9 something, which is apparently quite generous. Lots of people rate lower than that. But then I also tend to only clock in beers that I've really liked. So maybe that's what makes my average score higher. So see, we're already creating too many context variants here for me. I just want to drink the whiskey.
Are you one of those people that would be like, I'm never going to, like if it's a 5-star thing, right? I'm never going to rate it 5 stars. Nothing's perfect.
I think that's a really arsehole way of behaving. And that is a conversation you get with Untapped people. I have given out, somebody made me look the other week, I've given out a few, not hundreds, I think I've given out like 5 or 6 in all the years I've been using Untapped, 5 scores, like perfect 5s. Some of that is definitely led by context of where I'm drinking. If it was at the brewery where it's made and it was a really good day that I was there drinking. Mm-hmm. But I'm also not mean. Like I don't feel that, I know probably not so much these days, but there was definitely a period where I think brewers were really bothered by the ratings they were getting on Untapped. And if it was a bad rating, that, that also requires context. I love looking at Google reviews when it's like 2 or below, because that really is somebody who's got a personal vendetta and wants to shout about it on the internet.
Oh.
And so for like for the Untapped ratings, quite often like the 1 and 2s are people who have ordered like a really hyped sour beer, for example, tried it and have realized they don't like sour beer. So they've given it like 1, whereas it's realized it's not their style of beer. There's nothing wrong with the beer. It's a really good sour beer. But if you don't like sour beers, you really have no business handing out a 1 star, because that could influence other people to thinking that's a bad beer.
Right?
But equally, who am I to police you expressing your opinions? It's really difficult, Joshua. Yeah. So I just avoid all of that by drinking things instead of writing them up. It does interest me that and please write in and tell me if you know better. I don't know of a widely available app. Oh, I'm already walking this back in my head as I'm saying it. A widely available app which offers a similar experience as Untapped for whiskey. There is one for wine. There probably are other ones for beer, but Untapped is the biggest. There are some guys who came to our table at the Independent Spirits Festival who were creating a whiskey app. But it was brand new in 2026. So we've come to 2026 without an app, which I was heavily using Untapped in the early 2010s.
If Whiskey Base had an app, I would say that would be pretty comprehensive, because it's a huge base with a lot of people commenting, a lot of people giving their own rating system. There's one rating system that I quite like, though I've never used it because I don't rate whiskeys, but I have been thinking about it recently, about rating whiskeys. And it's by He Who Shall Not Be Named. So
Trump has a whiskey rating app?
Boris Johnson's Jim Murray system. Hear me out. Listen, he has
you've already committed several crimes and now you're coming at me in a fedora.
I like that he separates it out in 4 ways. 25 points each for nose, taste, finish, and then balance and complexity. And I think that's a really interesting way of evaluating. If you're going to use points, which, like you had said, I don't know if that's necessarily the best way to be rating a whiskey, but if you're going to be doing that, how do we think about our whiskeys? You know, whenever we do our tasting notes for the whiskeys that we sell, we talk about the nose, we talk about the palate, we talk about the finish. And then I like this 4th edition of balance and complexity. Is there balance between the nose and the taste and the finish? Like it's a very thoughtful way of approaching a rating system.
Or you could use a flavometer.
I like the flavometer.
See what I did there?
Well done.
I like the flavometer too, actually. Even though clearly the 3 of us don't agree on how it operates, which is fun. It's a talking point.
Which, by the way, listeners, viewers, there will be an episode coming up where we discuss the ins and outs of flavometers and why Jess is always wrong when it comes to the floral rating.
Well, at least I'm not suggesting we use a Jim Murray system. So I don't know who's more wrong here, Joshua. I reckon I could whip up some support.
I'm not trying to be controversial. It just ends up being controversial.
And yet you just slipping it right in. That in itself is a terrible double entendre, and I'm going to shut up now. Shame on me. Would you like to tell me about your smoothness experience over here to get us out, and maybe explain why we decided to have a little dram?
Yeah. So I would argue that this red breast is, from nose to palate to finish, it is doing exactly what I expect it to do. Mm-hmm. Like the story is consistent. It's not overly expressive. which, like I said, this was purchased in probably 2012. It's a 2011 bottling. So I don't know if oxidation has done anything to this, but overall it's just this very easygoing, straightforward kind of whiskey, but an incredible mouthfeel to it. Like at 57.7%, it's got a really incredible mouthfeel to it.
Okay, good. So that was something I was about to come to, which is, I think, sometimes as well, the use of your least favorite word is also, for me, I feel like it's an appropriate term, especially when it's not at cask strength. And that's because I live my life in the high octane lane of cask strength whiskey. That when I descend back to the world of mere mortals at the kind of low to mid 40s, something could be described, I think, arguably as smooth, because there's less alcohol in there. So it's not activating your tongue and your palate in the way that drinking a hot whiskey, hot ABV, I don't necessarily mean heated up, whiskey does. So this absolutely delicious Glenfiddich is a 43%. So that tells me this, we must have bought this in airport. I know that that's their airport strength version of this whiskey. The one on the shelves in the UK is 40, but the export, GTR range is 43.
Okay.
It's just really classy. That's why I'm drinking it out of my fancy lady glass. I feel like it's very elegant. It's very balanced. You know, it does everything that Glenfiddich does, and I will stand by them until the end of my time. It's got that lovely, like, stewed apple-y. There's a bit of kind of like apple crumble thing happening in this. It's just really refined and elegant. It's not shouty. It's not angry. It's a perfect thing to drink on a Monday lunchtime or any other lunchtime you like the look of an easygoing whiskey.
See, I like that.
It looks super cool. It's got a really cool little, I don't know, the camera's not going to show me now. It's got a really lovely kind of black and gold. Like, I just think you look at this and I'm expecting a classy experience. Am I expecting a really punchy, life-changing single cask whiskey out of this? Absolutely not. That's not this. That's not why I picked it. Is this just a really delicate sipper? I had it with a bunch of cheese last week. So good. And I had it, didn't have anything else with it. Didn't have it as a half and a half. It was just a thing that I drank at a fire pit. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I would describe this one as not elegant, but almost like a utilitarian whiskey.
Sexy.
Right. It's not. It's just like a straightforward, solid drinker that you might say maybe this would be a good mixer, a high octane mixer. And which is why I tend to drink the 15-year-old. I think the 15-year-old has got tons of complexity to it. It's really well balanced. There's a at least the bottlings that I have, I don't know if they've changed the recipe at all. There's a sherry component to it, which was quite nice.
It's definitely got a nice richness that I think builds on the 12. But again, I think that's because you and I are looking for whiskey that is doing a little bit more. So I think maybe that's sometimes why 15 is a sweet spot for me, because it tends to be a step above the entry level, both in terms of complexity and what cask makeup you tend to see being bottled. But you also haven't quite entered into the realm of the really decadent, very special occasion whiskies, which I don't have the budget to drink Redbreast 21 every day. So that has to become a special occasion treat. Like this little Glenfiddich is a special treat whiskey when I want to feel like a fancy lady.
So I poured back most of what I was drinking, not because I didn't like it, but because I wanted to just compare that to the Black Bushmills. So I'm going to have just a tiny sip of this just to see the little difference. See if I like it more. The nose is more expressive. You're more of a...
I've had some...
Yeah, okay.
I was going to say, I've had some of their, they have a special range that's called the Causeway Collection that come in really fancy jazzy boxes that are shaped like the rocks at the Causeway. Their Bushmill sells some absolutely fantastic liquid.
Wow, right. Ooh. There's like roasted coffee grounds to this. A little bit of citrus. It's more, that's so funny. some black licorice. There's more of a complexity to this than the Redbreast.
And the point is, dear listeners, he's refusing to acknowledge the word smooth at any stage in this process, thus defeating the point of this, which was, I thought if we fed him some Irish whiskey, at some point he would concede it was a little bit smooth.
I thought my ability to avoid that was smooth in and of itself.
Ah, there you go, listeners. Quick, let's all leave. Well, that's my achievements met for the day.
All right. So let us get out of here on that. Jess, as always, is very cool talking about a category that we rarely get to talk about. But I think it's this larger conversation of, is there room for change in other categories? I think for Irish, I hope that it's a success. It'd be nice to see things expand. We have seen it, like you had said, in the Scotch whiskey industry with tequila casks and mezcal casks. And could we expand beyond that? I guess it would require one of the big companies to purchase another distillery.
Obviously,
maybe they need to
the
purchase a Chestnut Grove. That's what they need to do. They need to purchase a Chestnut Grove.
How do we start suggesting that to people? Go to all your tastings. Tell all of your reps you just really like some chestnut whiskey. It's a nightmare to work with. I've seen what the casks do, but the flavors are definitely interesting.
There you go. Well, for those who are coming to the Jubilee, make sure you come by the Irish whiskey table, because there will be some Redbreast there. There's no doubt about that. And if you have not yet purchased your tickets to the Jubilee, well, guess what? Tickets to the Whiskey Jubilee are on sale now. You just go to our website, and there's a link right on our navigation bar to that. And if you've loved this episode, like you love all of our episodes, especially when Jess is on here.
That's because I'm paying them all to say that.
Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, tickle the little bell, the whole jazz. And I guess, Jess, listeners, we'll see everybody next week.
Next time. All right. Let's do it all again. This was fun. I'm going to go away and drink the rest of this.
Same.
Cheers, listeners, viewers.
Cheers.
Cheers.